Okay, so, when you think about corn, you probably picture like, those sweet kernels right on the cob, maybe slathered in butter at a summer barbecue.
Yeah,
But here's something to really chew on. Corn is actually a huge global commodity.
that's right.
Like it's seriously big business, and it's a major driver of economic growth worldwide.
It really is. It's essential to our entire food system.
So how do we make sure we're getting the absolute most out of those vast cornfields?
Right.
And that is exactly what we're diving into today.
Absolutely. We've got a fascinating piece of research here that really digs deep into the science behind fertilizing corn.
Okay.
And trust me, this goes way beyond just sprinkling some fertilizer around and hoping for the best.
Interesting.
We're talking about precision and utilizing these multiple top dressing techniques to optimize yields.
Okay, so top dressing, I've heard that term thrown around. But can you just give us like a quick definition of what that means?
Sure, top dressing is essentially a method of fertilizing where you apply fertilizer to the soil surface after the crop has already emerged.
Gotcha. So it's not like mixing it into the soil before planting.
Exactly. It's about giving the corn those extra nutrients throughout its growth cycle.
So strategic feeding,
It's
basically.
exactly strategic feeding at the right time with the right nutrients.
Interesting. Okay, so in this deep dive, we're going to really break down the most important information from this research.
That's right.
To understand how using the right fertilization methods at the right time can make a huge difference in the quality and quantity of your corn harvest.
That's the goal. To give everyone listening some really practical knowledge they can actually use.
I love it. And to keep things clear and easy to digest,
Yeah.
we're focusing on these staged top dressing methods because, as you said, feeding the corn at the right time with the right nutrients is key.
Exactly. It's all about timing.
Okay, so to help us visualize this a little better,
Sure.
can we break this top dressing process down into different stages?
Absolutely. So to make things really clear, we're going to look at this as a three-stage process,
Okay,
almost like a tailored nutrition plan for the corn's life cycle.
I like that.
So first up, we've got stem-fortifying fertilizer.
Okay.
Then we'll move into ear-fortifying.
Uh-huh.
And finally, we'll finish up with grain-fortifying applications.
Perfect. So each step is specifically designed to support the corn at a different point in its development.
Exactly. Each stage has its own unique nutrient requirement.
Makes sense. All right, let's get into that first stage then, stem fortifying fertilizer.
Let's do it.
So according to the research, this should happen before the jointing stage. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with corn lingo, what exactly does jointing mean?
Jointing is essentially when the corn plant starts to really stretch out and that main stem suggests to elongate. It's a sign that the plant is moving into a rapid growth phase.
So it's kind of like a growth spurt for teenagers.
Exactly. And for spring corn, this typically happens around 40 to 50 days after you've planted the seeds when you see about 6 or 7 leaves on the plant.
Got it. And what about summer corn? Does that follow a different timeline?
Summer corn tends to develop a bit faster, so you'll likely see jointing a bit earlier, maybe around 25 to 30 days after planting, with about 5 or 6 leaves present.
Interesting. So the timing is slightly different depending on the variety of corn and when it's planted.
Exactly. You need to adjust based on the specific type of corn you're growing and the climate in your region.
Okay, so we've got the timing down.
Yeah.
Why is this specific window before jointing so crucial for applying stem fortifying fertilizer?
Well, during this early stage, the corn seedlings are incredibly vulnerable. They're like little babies just starting out in the world. And they need the right nutrients to develop a strong foundation.
So it's like making sure they get all their vitamins and minerals.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that this is also when those crucial male and female ears start to develop.
Oh, wow. So early on.
Yep. So giving them that initial nutrient boost is crucial for building strong stalks, healthy leaves, and a robust root system. It's like building a solid base for a skyscraper. If you don't have a strong foundation, the whole structure is compromised.
That's a great analogy. So basically, this stem fortifying fertilizer sets the stage for the entire life of the corn plant.
That's right. It's about giving them that strong growth impetus from the get-go.
I love that phrase, growth impetus. It really captures the idea of giving those young plants a powerful push to thrive.
And that well-established root system early on is essential for the plant to access water and nutrients effectively throughout its entire life.
Right, because those roots are how it drinks and eats, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And the way you apply the fertilizer at this stage is also super important.
Okay, so let's talk about the how-to here. What does the research recommend for applying this stem fortifying fertilizer?
So the key here is to place the fertilizer about 10 to 15 centimeters away from the base of the plant.
Not too close, not too far.
Exactly. Too close, and you risk burning those delicate young roots.
Ouch.
But too far away, and the plant has to work harder to access the nutrients.
So it's a bit of a Goldilocks situation.
You got it. And then you want to create these furrows that are about 5 to 10 centimeters deep and place the fertilizer in those.
Okay, furrows are just like little trenches dug into the soil, right?
Exactly, little trenches for the fertilizer. And then you want to cover those furrows with soil as quickly as possible.
So why is covering them up so important?
Covering the furrows helps to prevent something called volatilization, which is basically when the nitrogen in the fertilizer turns into a gas and escapes into the air.
Oh, so you're losing those valuable nutrients.
Exactly. And covering the fertilizer also helps to keep it moist, which allows it to dissolve gradually and become available to the roots over time.
So it's kind of like a slow release mechanism.
Exactly. It ensures the corn gets a steady supply of nutrients throughout this early growth stage.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about the timing and the application method. Now let's get into the fertilizer itself. What kind of fertilizer does the research recommend for this stem-fortifying stage?
They recommend using compound fertilizers, which are basically fertilizers that contain a mix of different nutrients.
Okay. And is there a specific ratio of nutrients that works best?
They mention a 15.15.15 NPK ratio as a good general option.
Okay, so NPK, that stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right?
Exactly. Those are the three main macronutrients that plants need to grow and thrive.
And can you give us a quick reminder of what each of those does for the plant?
Sure, so nitrogen is essential for leafy growth. It's what gives those leaves their lush green color.
Okay, so nitrogen is all about those leaves.
Pretty much. Then you've got phosphorus, which is super important for root development. It helps to establish a strong and healthy root system, which is the plant's anchor, and how it takes up water and nutrients from the soil.
So phosphorus is the root booster.
Exactly. And finally, potassium contributes to overall plant vigor. It helps the plant to resist diseases and cope with stress.
So potassium is like the plant's immune system booster.
That's a great way to think about it.
Right.
So this 15.15.15 ratio provides a balanced dose of all three of these essential nutrients to support the corn during its early growth phase.
That makes sense. Now, the research also mentions adding decomposed farmyard manure at this stage, which is a more traditional organic approach.
That's right. It's a great way to supplement those chemical fertilizers.
So what are the advantages of using farmyard manure alongside those compound fertilizers?
Well, while the compound fertilizer gives the plants those readily available nutrients they need right away, the farmyard manure works a bit differently. It breaks down slowly over time, improving the soil structure and releasing nutrients gradually.
So it's kind of like a long-term investment in soil health.
Exactly. It helps to create a more fertile and resilient soil environment in the long run.
And it provides those extra nutrients that the plants can access over time.
Exactly. It complements those faster-acting chemical fertilizers perfectly.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've set our corn up for a strong start with that stem-fortifying fertilizer. Now let's move on to the second stage, ear-fortifying fertilizer.
Sounds good.
So when does this stage kick in?
This stage starts from the jointing stage when that stem really begins to elongate and continues all the way up to tasseling, which is when the male flowers appear at the top of the plant. And the peak time for this ear-fortifying fertilizer is during the differentiation of those female ear spikelets.
Wow, spikelets. That sounds pretty technical.
It's basically the very beginning stage of those ears forming.
Got it.
And for spring corn, this usually happens around when the plant has 13 to 15 leaves. And for summer corn, it's a bit earlier, around the 11 to 13 leaf stage.
Okay, so again, slightly different timelines depending on the variety of corn.
Exactly.
So why is this window when those ear spikelets are forming so crucial?
This is a super important period because the corn plant is doing a lot of heavy lifting at this point. It's still putting energy into growing taller and stronger, but it's also starting to focus on developing those ears.
So it's multitasking.
Big time. And the number of those ear spikelets that form during this stage directly determines how big the ear can get and how many rows of kernels it will have.
So essentially you're setting the upper limit for how much the plant can produce.
Exactly. And because the plant has such high demands for both vegetative growth and reproductive development during this phase, its nutrient needs are through the roof.
That makes sense. It's like a teenager going through a growth spurt. They need to eat constantly.
Exactly. So getting the nutrition right during this ear-fortifying stage can make a huge difference in the final yield.
Okay, so if we don't fertilize properly during this stage, we could be seriously limiting how much corn we harvest later on.
Absolutely. You could end up with smaller ears and fewer kernels.
Not good.
No.
Now, the research suggests using quick-acting nitrogen fertilizers like urea, for this stage.
Yes, urea is a great choice here.
But we just talked about nitrogen being important for the first stage. Why the focus on nitrogen again now?
That's a great question. So while nitrogen is always important for corn growth, it becomes especially critical during this rapid growth phase.
Okay.
All that stalk and leaf development, plus the formation of the ears, requires a ton of nitrogen.
Makes sense.
And urea is perfect for this because it's highly soluble, which means the corn plant can absorb it really quickly. It's like a quick energy boost.
So it's giving the plant that immediate nitrogen hit it needs.
Exactly. It's like giving an athlete a quick energy gel during a race.
Now, the research also recommends combining this fertilization with both watering and something called intertillage.
Right.
So that's a three-pronged approach. Can you walk us through why all three of these practices together are more effective than just using fertilizer alone?
Sure. So watering helps to dissolve the urea and carry it down into the root zone where the plant can access it easily.
Okay, so the water acts like a delivery system.
Exactly. And then intertillage, which is basically loosening the soil around the plants, helps to improve soil aeration.
Okay, and why is that important?
Well, healthy roots need oxygen to grow and to efficiently take up nutrients.
So it's like making sure the roots can breathe.
Precisely. And by watering and loosening the soil, you're creating the ideal environment for those roots to soak up all that nitrogen from the urea.
Gotcha. So it's all about creating the perfect conditions for nutrient absorption.
Exactly. It's a synergistic approach where each practice enhances the effectiveness of the others.
Okay, now in terms of how much urea to apply, the research gives a general guideline of about 15 to 20 kilograms per mow for soil with medium fertility.
Right. But it's important to remember that this is just a starting point.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Absolutely. You need to consider the existing fertility of your soil and how well the corn is growing.
So what are some signs that a grower should look for to know if they need to adjust that amount?
That's a really important point. You need to be observant and respond to what your plants are telling you.
So it's like being a plant detective.
Exactly. So if you start to see signs of nutrient deficiency, like the lower leaves turning pale green or yellowing, or if the plants seem to be growing slower than expected, that's a good indication that they need more nitrogen.
So it's all about those visual cues.
Exactly. And if the plants are looking really healthy and vigorous, you might be able to get away with using a bit less fertilizer.
So it's a balancing act.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to find that sweet spot.
Okay, now it's not just about that main nitrogen fertilizer at this stage, is it?
Right.
The research also talks about supplementing with something called potassium dihydrogen phosphate.
Right.
So for those who might not be familiar with this, what is it exactly?
It's basically a water-soluble fertilizer that contains both phosphorus and potassium.
Got it. And why is it beneficial to apply this directly to the leaves?
Applying it directly to the leaves is called foliar feeding, and it allows the plant to absorb those nutrients much faster.
So it's a more direct route.
Exactly. It
Right.
bypasses the roots and goes straight to the leaves.
Now, why would you want to do that?
Well, sometimes the root system might be under stress, maybe because of dry conditions or compacted soil. So foliar feeding can help to provide those essential nutrients even when the roots aren't functioning optimally.
Got it. So it's like a backup system.
Exactly. And it can also be really helpful for giving the plant a quick boost of phosphorus and potassium, especially during that critical ear development phase.
So it's like a targeted nutrient delivery system.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've nourished the developing ears. Now we move on to the final stage of our corn fertilization journey. Grain-fortifying fertilizer.
Final push.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this happens roughly 10 to 15 days before and after tasseling.
No. Right around when those male flowers are fully emerged.
Now, this might seem like the end of the growth cycle, but the research really emphasizes that this late-stage feeding is crucial.
Incredibly important.
Why is that?
Well, here's a mind-blowing fact. 90% of the dry weight of the corn kernels that you harvest comes from photosynthesis that happens in the leaves after the ears have been fertilized.
90%. Wow, that's a huge number.
It is, and it really highlights how important it is to keep those leaves healthy and green during this grain filling period.
So even though the ears are already there, the plant still has a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. It needs to keep photosynthesizing to pack those kernels full of nutrients and dry matter.
So if we neglect the plants at this stage, we could be missing out on a significant portion of our potential yield.
Exactly. And the research even calls out a specific practice that can be really detrimental to yields.
Oh, it's that.
It's this idea of hanging up the hoe after the beginning of autumn and basically neglecting field management during this late stage.
So just assuming that the job is done once those ears appear.
Exactly. But as we've seen, the plant still needs a lot of support during this grain filling phase.
Right. So what kind of problems can arise if we neglect our cornfields during this critical period?
Well, those lower leaves might start to yellow and die off prematurely, which reduces the plant's ability to photosynthesize.
So it's like losing solar panels.
Exactly. You're reducing the plant's energy production capacity. And the whole plant can also start to age prematurely, which further hinders its ability to fill those kernels.
So essentially you end up with smaller, lighter kernels and a lower overall yield.
Exactly. It's like running a marathon and giving up just before the finish line.
All that effort for nothing.
Pretty much.
Okay, so just like with the previous stages, the amount of grain-fortifying fertilizer we use isn't set in stone.
That's right. It needs to be adjusted based on a few factors.
Like what?
Well, the fertility of your soil is a big one. If your soil is already rich in nutrients, you might not need to add as much fertilizer. The moisture level in the soil is also important. If it's a dry year, the plants might have a harder time accessing nutrients, so you might need to increase the amount of fertilizer.
Makes sense.
And finally, you need to consider how vigorously the corn plants are growing. If they're looking healthy and robust, you might be able to use a bit less fertilizer. But if they're struggling, you might need to give them a little extra boost.
So again, it's about observation and responding to what you see in your fields.
Exactly.
What kind of fertilizer do we want to use for this grain-fortifying stage?
The main focus here is still on nitrogen to support all that photosynthesis happening in the leaves.
Okay.
But this time we're also adding in some potassium.
And why is potassium important at this stage?
Potassium plays a crucial role in moving sugars and other nutrients from the leaves to the developing kernels.
So it's like a transport system within the plant.
Exactly. It helps to ensure those kernels get all the nutrients they need to plump up and mature properly.
And potassium also contributes to overall plant health and can improve the weight and quality of the grain.
Exactly. It's a key nutrient for this final stage.
Got it. Now, the research talks about applying this fertilizer through either whole or strip application.
Right.
Can you just quickly explain what those methods involve?
Sure. So whole application is pretty straightforward. You basically dig small holes around the plants and place the fertilizer in those.
Okay. And what about strip application?
Strip application involves creating shallow trenches or strips of fertilizer alongside the rows of corn.
Got it. And then you cover the fertilizer with soil and water it in, just like with the previous stages.
Exactly. That helps to prevent volatilization and ensures the fertilizer gets down to the roots.
And we're back to foliar feeding with that potassium dihydrogen phosphate again at this stage, right?
Exactly.
It seems like that's a really versatile tool that can be used throughout the ear and grain development stages.
It really is. It provides a readily available source of phosphorus and potassium, which are both essential for maximizing kernel development.
So it's a targeted boost for those hungry kernels.
You got it?
Okay, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty of actually calculating how much of each type of fertilizer to use.
Okay.
The research emphasizes that the ideal amounts will vary depending on the specific variety of corn you're growing and the natural fertility of your soil,
That's right. There's no magic formula that works for everyone.
but does offer some general guidelines for spring corn versus summer corn.
It does.
So let's start with spring corn. For spring corn, the research recommends what it calls a light in the front and heavy in the back approach with a 3.1.6 ratio for stem-fortifying, ear-fortifying, and grain-fortifying fertilizer, respectively.
Right.
Now, can you explain what that means in practical terms?
Sure. So let's say you've decided to use a total of 50 kilograms of fertilizer per mu for your spring corn.
Okay.
Using this 3.1.6 ratio, you would allocate about 15 kilograms of that to stem-fortifying fertilizer, 5 kilograms to ear-fortifying, and a whopping 30 kilograms to grain-fortifying fertilizer.
So the majority of the fertilizer is being applied in that final stage.
Exactly.
Why is that?
Well, spring corn has a longer growing season compared to summer corn, so it has more time to develop those ears and fill those kernels.
Makes sense.
So the heaviest feeding is saved for that final grain filling stage to really maximize kernel size and weight.
So it's like fueling that final sprint to the finish line.
Exactly.
Okay, now what about summer corn?
For summer corn, the strategy flips to what the research calls heavy in the front and light in the back.
Okay.
And they suggest ratios like 6.3.1 or even 6.4 for stem versus grain fertilizer.
So you're really front-loading the fertilizer for summer corn.
Exactly.
Why the different approach?
Summer corn typically has a much shorter growing season than spring corn, so it needs to get off to a really strong start.
Makes sense.
By applying a larger proportion of fertilizer in that early stem fortifying stage, you're giving the plant the resources it needs to establish a strong root system and build those stalks quickly.
So you're setting it up for success right from the beginning.
Exactly. And because its growing season is shorter, the overall demand for nutrients during the grain filling stage might be a bit lower.
Gotcha. So you don't need to apply as much fertilizer at the back end.
Exactly. It's all about tailoring the fertilization strategy to the specific growth habits of the corn variety.
Makes perfect sense. So these ratios give us a good starting point. But we still need to be flexible and adjust based on the conditions of the current growing season.
Right? Absolutely. Factors like weather patterns and pest pressure can significantly influence the plant's nutrient needs.
So for example, if it's a really dry year, you might need to increase the overall amount of fertilizer you're using.
Exactly. Because the plants might have a harder time accessing nutrients from the soil.
And if there's a big outbreak of pests or diseases, you might also need to increase the fertilizer to help the plants build resistance.
That's right. It's all about being adaptable and responsive to what's happening in your fields.
This has been an incredibly informative deep dive into the world of corn fertilization. It's amazing how much science goes into optimizing those yields.
It really is. It's a fascinating blend of scientific knowledge and practical experience.
So if you had to distill everything we've discussed into a few key takeaway points for our listeners, what would they be?
I think the most important thing to remember is that corn fertilization is not a one-time event, but a series of carefully timed interventions.
Okay.
The timing of those top dressing stages is crucial. You need to align those applications with the plant's growth stages.
Got it.
And the type of fertilizer you choose and how you apply it should also be tailored to the plant's specific needs at each stage.
Right. So it's not just about throwing any old fertilizer around.
Exactly. It's about being precise and strategic.
And finally, it's crucial to be observant and adapt your approach based on what you see in your fields.
Absolutely. Because every growing season is different, and your plants will tell you what they need if you pay attention.
This is a far cry from just scattering some fertilizer and hoping for the best. It's a really scientific approach to getting the most out of your corn crop.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it all comes down to understanding the plant's needs and providing those nutrients at the right time and in the right way.
It really makes you appreciate the complexity of growing something as seemingly simple as corn.
It does. And as we continue to learn more about plant physiology and soil science, I think we'll see even more sophisticated and targeted fertilization techniques emerge in the future.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder what the future holds for corn production and how we can continue to optimize yields in a sustainable way.
Absolutely. It's an exciting field with a lot of potential for innovation.
Well, on that note, I think we've covered a ton of ground today. Thanks for sharing your expertise and helping us unlock the secrets of successful corn fertilization.
It's been my pleasure.
I hope everyone listening feels empowered to take this knowledge and apply it to their own cornfields. For all of you corn enthusiasts out there, happy growing, and may your harvest be bountiful. And for those of you who are just starting to explore the world of corn, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to delve deeper into the fascinating world of agriculture.
There's always more to learn.
Until next time, happy farming, everyone.